begin. All right, so I'm assuming that everybody got the message on iCollege that I'm opening up. Everybody who wants to come to the face-to-face class, you may come on both Tuesdays and Thursdays from now on. Just because attendance has dwindled down significantly, and it's pretty low considering that I opened it up to both Tuesday and Thursday students. So maybe the Thursday people didn't get the message. I don't know. Where's my Thursday people? One Thursday person? So one Thursday person got the message? All right. Come on in. So yeah, from now on, you may come on both Tuesdays and Thursdays. I don't see that being a problem in terms of the class reaching that capacity limit, right? Even if we are to kind of open it up to both Tuesdays and Thursdays. So from now on, you may come to Tuesday and Thursday face-to-face classes. Questions about anything? Questions, concerns? Yeah, great. So I am opening up. So the exam will open on Thursday, right? So I'll be opening up the exam on Thursday in the morning sometime. You can take the exam anywhere between Thursday until next Tuesday. So 29th is the very deadline to take exam 1. I am not accepting any excuse for missing the exam. Let me repeat that one more time so people at home don't forget to like and subscribe. Wow, I did way better than I thought I was going to. Okay. I will not, there will be no excuse for missing your exam, especially considering that I am opening it up for an entire week. So beginning on Thursday, all the way until next Tuesday, by midnight next Tuesday, you may take the exam anytime. Obviously, there's a time limit. I believe it's 120 minutes, which is a long time. That's plenty of time to finish the exam, right? So that should not be a problem at all. Make sure that once again, you're using my study guide or my teaching notes as a study guide, but don't neglect to read the textbook, right? Because a lot of times the notes don't make sense unless you go and dive into the textbook. Then notes make way more sense, right? So if you try to just understand the notes without reading the textbook, you might have a little trouble. So don't neglect the textbook, but I will say that if I don't talk about it in my lecture, or if it's not in my PowerPoint, or if it's not in the notes, if it's not in all three of those things, but it's in the textbook, don't worry about it. It's not going to show up on the exam. Okay. Questions about that? We're all sort of on the same page there, hopefully. Make sure you're constantly checking on iCollege for announcements and that sort of thing. All the lectures that I have recorded so far should be available for you to watch if you need to watch them again. And I posted the links in the actual module tab, so you should be able. The first 2 classes I did not record, so you can't watch those, but you can always go back and read the notes. Fantastic. I believe that was all the announcement that I had. Oh, so the 29th, considering that that's the final day for the exam, we will not have class on the 29th. On Tuesday, the 29th, we will not have class. We will not have the face-to-face class. Just make sure that you finish up that exam. I highly recommend that you don't wait till last minute to take the exam, because that's when all the problems start to happen, right? That will not be an excuse. All right, before we begin, I heard that we have some beef. We have some beef in the back. Well, what's the beef? What's going on?
For multiple reasons.
There's multiple.
There are multiple reasons at this point. Let's see. Yeah, besides Captain Marvel.
Right, sure. We had a dispute about Captain Marvel, of course.
I don't know, I'm just antsy about the thingy.
The exam?
Yeah.
I would not stress out about it, right? Because I do not craft my questions to try to trick you, right? I think the exam is incredibly easy, okay? If you read the notes, you've been attending class, and if you watch the lectures, you should have no problem whatsoever on this exam.
Okay, so you have to pinky swear that I'm not going to fail this exam.
Okay, pinky swear.
Okay, thank you.
You will. All right. Let's start with our warm-up question here. What's currently obsessed with right now? What's one thing that you're really into at the moment? It could be a new favorite TV show, a new fitness regimen, or maybe you're doing, I don't know, Pure Barre. I don't know what you kids do. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
The organic gummy bears.
You're eating organic gummy bears.
Yes, I think they're better than real gummy
Oh, it
bears.
tastes better. Well, what brand are we talking about here?
It's Black Forest, right? I have like a jumbo pack in my dorm from Costco. Yeah.
Sounds delicious.
Like at least 50%.
What does that mean, organic gummy bears? What does that even mean? Does
I
that...
don't know.
It
You don't-
says so juicy, so good.
There we go. Oliver, did you have a hand up?
I'm thinking, no, but I can answer the question.
Sure.
I'm obsessed with Criminal Minds at the moment.
Criminal Minds.
That's
Wow,
all.
excellent. Criminal Minds. What about on this side? Yes.
A band you're listening to, Husker Du.
What are you listening to?
They're called Husker Du.
What is that name again?
Husker Du.
Okay, interesting. What kind of genre are we talking about here?
I just say rock.
Rock. Yeah, rock and roll. Right. Sometimes is it like a hair metal? What are we talking about here? We're talking about like an alternative rock, like an acoustic rock. We're talking about like a synth band.
Probably more towards punk rock.
Well, punk rock, right? Yeah. The system. Tear down the walls, right? That's what you say. Break the guitar on the floor afterward, after every performance. All right. What about over here?
I'm obsessed with this cover of Bad Romance at the moment.
Cover of Bad Romance?
Hailstorm, I believe it's
Okay.
called.
Well, what's so great about this cover?
Well, it's a rock cover, and it's really great. She like hits the note really good.
Okay, excellent. More music. What else? What are we currently obsessed with? Yes.
Okay, two things.
Yes.
I really like this new band, Peach Pit. They're not new, but I love them.
Peach Pit.
I just stumbled upon them. They're the best. It's the only thing I listen to in my car now. And then Pink Hair Dye.
And what was that? The second one?
Pink Hair Dye.
Pink hair dye. I see. So you've been dyeing your hair pink.
Yes, I found a really good brand, and it's like organic. I forgot what it's
Once
called.
again, the word organic. I'm not sure what this is even supposed to mean. Is it like...
Well, it's just like it's good for your hair.
Okay.
Because it's like all natural stuff instead of like...
Does it repair the split ends? Does it fix the split ends? I've heard this is concern, right? You want to fix the splits.
No, it's
That's
just
what I'm
that
saying.
I bleach my hair a lot.
Okay.
And it's like dead. And so if I add another like chemical to it, it may just like melt and like literally like fall out of my
Okay.
head. But this one doesn't make my hair melt. And it's super neon, which I really like.
All right. Excellent. Seems like you're having a lot of luck with the hair dye over there. You know,
Period.
keep it up. Do we have a hand over here? Do we have a hand? Kurt? Someone? Yes. No?
I'll go.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, I'm sure. I'm obsessed with Clara right now.
Oh,
I like
yes.
just
Queen.
like discovered her, and I'm like obsessed with her music.
So who is this? Is this a singer?
She's a singer.
Wait, what was the name? Clara?
Clara.
What kind of genre are we talking about here? Rock?
It's like bedroom pop.
Yeah, yeah.
What'd you call it?
Bedroom pop.
Bedroom
Yes.
pop.
Yes.
What does that mean?
It's like a song you can make in your bedroom. That's
Yeah.
the
Oh,
concept.
like with a little synth machine?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Bedroom pop, right? Interesting. We're learning a lot of new things here today. Right? Bedroom pop, right? Pink hair dye, organic pink hair dye. It's always good for the hair. Let's move on to the questions, right? What is happening in Russia during this time period? All right, so we're talking about Soviet cinema in the 1920s. We're going to talk about montage and equivalent art forms. But what's happening in Russia during this time? Yes?
The Bolshevik Revolution.
Right, Bolshevik Revolution. After World War I, we have the Bolshevik Revolution. Someone describe to me what this is. Give me a little history lesson, a little history 101 on what this means.
Where the communists took power under Vladimir Lenin.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a Soviet Revolution after World War I. It removes the Tsar from power, right? And then we have which eventually becomes...
Bolshevik versus the Menshevik.
Yeah, exactly. It essentially becomes a socialist government, and then it kind of morphs into more of a communist government, right? Exactly. So we have a new government that's happening right now. Okay. What else is happening during this time period? Say it again. Okay. What else is happening during this time period? Yeah, right. So we're after the war. It might be beneficial to think of this time period in the Soviet Union as three distinct eras. Right? We have like a hardship, a wartime hardship, right? Where we had economic depression, and then there's a new economic policy which instills more of a capitalistic ideals, right? Private companies and that sort of thing. And then we have more of a government constraint, right? So think of this time in the Soviet Union as three distinct eras. And we'll talk about that once we get kind of closer to it. Let's talk about it. All right, so describe some characteristics of montage filmmaking, right? So montage tends to be like the most influential artistic movement that is happening during this time period. Someone can explain to me what montage is. Yes?
It's kind of like a string of an assortment of different shots that may or may not kind of revolve around the same thing, or maybe like switching between two things kind of rapidly.
Yeah, so it's the way of constructing a scene with various shots using editing, right? So the primary technique with montage is editing. You're constructing a story through editing rather than just pointing and shooting, right? So a very distinct difference between German expressionism and Soviet montage, very different from each other, both very influential. But both Soviet montage or montage filmmaking is the belief that the actual construction of the scene through editing conveys a message that's more than just the narrative of what you're showing, right? Excellent. Describe some contemporary films that use montage. Almost every film uses montage, right? Give me an example. Yes?
Richard and been on Titanic.
Okay, so give me an example. When is there a time when they use montage editing?
You remember the old lady?
Yes.
She was dying, right?
Okay.
And then she was thinking about the times that she had spent with Jack. Remember when she died, kind of?
Sure. It was my favorite part of the film.
There's a part when he was like, she was like going through everything, and she was like young.
Okay.
And then like there was Jack at the stairs with his hand out.
Yeah, handsome Jack, Leonardo DiCaprio, right?
God bless.
Sure. Yes, another example.
Euphoria uses montage.
You said Euphoria?
Euphoria?
Euphoria. Is that show on Netflix? Is that correct?
HBO.
HBO. Right, uses montage. Give me another example. Yes, in the back.
Pretty much any movie that has like a wardrobe scene where like people are trying on different outfits.
Exactly. Great example of. So what's a film? Give me is it Pretty Woman? Is that one? Is that the one with Sandra Bullock? Is that Sandra Bullock? Pretty Woman?
No.
Same person. I'm just kidding. No.
I'm offended.
Oh, you're offended. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Now we can begin.
So now we have to.
Now we
I am not. The crew is not like. We need to come up with a nickname for you guys.
We're the main characters.
Not a contemporary film. Memento would be a good example. Fantastic.
Crackhead.
Yes.
Well, I guess wait, that's kind of more modern. I was gonna say one of the X-Men movies when the fast guy like goes into the building and is like grabbing all the different people.
Quicksilver?
Yeah, and then as he goes into the building, they're being like the cameo or when it close up, grabbing all the people, so
Yeah.
they're all the rings and kind of following him.
In X-Men First Class, do you remember when Xavier is training all the X-Men in that one part, and everyone's becoming increasingly better at using their powers? That's a great example of montage. Fantastic. Can anyone tell me what constructivism is? Yes.
Isn't it like kind of like propaganda where like the Soviets try to make themselves look all like futuristic and like kind of
Robotic, yes.
robotic and like out of this world, like on the next level type of thing.
Right, it's this artistically industrial way of artistic expression, right? You're comparing human bodies to machinery. Right? Well, I'll show several examples of constructivism, but it's this idea where you're actually constructing a scene and you're comparing it to elements in like machinery. Right? Excellent. All right, so I wanted to show a contemporary example of montage filmmaking just to show how influential this. What's going on here? There it is. Nope. right, so this is from Looper. Any Looper fans here? Anyone seen Looper? All right, so this is a great example of montage filmmaking. All right, so what are some of the messages that are being conveyed simply by the use of editing, right? So there's a narrative that's being shown through the visuals, but what's the message that's being shown simply by the editing? Yes.
The passage of time.
Right, that's the big one, right? There's clearly a passage of time, and we as film watchers, we understand the conventions of cinema, so we're not confused by this notion. We're not like, wait, what happened? Why is this person here, and then now it's a new person? Like, we're not confused by that. We make assumptions based on conventions of cinema, right? So these messages are being conveyed through editing. What else is being conveyed simply by editing? Yes.
I don't know if you like overthinking it, but every time like a new year popped up, it was less brighter. It was kind of like more like, it seemed really like spontaneous and cool in the beginning, but like every year it kind of got like darker and like less exciting.
Right, now we're talking about aesthetics.
Yeah.
Great, excellent. Right, so you brought in the fact that it actually looks darker. The titles look darker, right? Even the filmmaking itself, like the lighting is darker, which is kind of conveying this idea that he's kind of slowly getting to a darker place in his life. Great, fantastic.
There's a sense of repetition too, where every so often it always cut back to the same shot of the table, the needle, and the handgun.
Okay, yeah, right. So we're showing close-ups of some very important elements in the film, right? So there's a close-up of the needle, there's a close-up of the gun. What are the messages being conveyed by this? He does drugs, right? There's no need for us to cut to a scene where he goes, then I took drugs for a long time. Like that scene's not necessary because you're showing a close-up of the actual needle and a close-up of the gun. Yes.
It got progressively worse because the first drug scene was just him smoking something, then it was a needle, then you had the tie-off with the needle
Right.
later.
Yeah, great. And then we show the close-up of the gun, which is kind of conveying this idea that he's slowly being pushed into this more violent lifestyle because his money is running out, right? We get that message. Once again, he's not saying, and then my money ran out. We're showing his little safe there with his money dwindling right now. So once again, montage is this idea that where you can convey messages narratively, you can convey messages visually, but you can also convey messages through the actual editing of the scene. And different messages can be conveyed depending on how you actually construct the scene. And we'll kind of dive into that a little more here in a second. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the Soviet Union. All right, so once again, it might be very beneficial to think of this time period as three distinct eras. Right, we have war communism, 1918, 1920. This is more like an economic depression. People are suffering. Then we have a new economic policy in 1921 to 1924, implementing more capitalistic ideas, right? So promoting more private industry. So you're seeing kind of an economic boom here, maybe a slight economic boom. And then you have increased government control in 1925 to 1933, which is the government is essentially trying to control control everything, but in terms of the film industry, controlling the messages that are being conveyed in film, right? So the government is actually regulating what kind of films you can make. And we'll see how these economic policies, influence the film industry in the Soviet Union and how it kind of influences artistic expression as well. All right, so let's talk about the hardships of war communism. So there's two revolutions. The first revolution is the removal of the Tsar after World War I, and there's a second revolution, that's the Bolshevik Revolution. Lenin comes into power, right, and establishes the Soviet government. The People's Commissariat of Education sort of takes control of the film industry, although the director who's in charge is sort of is sort of supportive of film, right? So there's not a lot of regulation in film during this time period. The Moscow Film School in 1919 is established. A very influential filmmaker called Lev Kolshov started coming up with this concept called the Kolshov effect. This, can anyone tell me what this is? It's a very influential artistic expression in film. Yes, in the back. Nope. Kolshov effect? So the Kolshov effect, it works like this. It's this idea that you can take two scenes, and there's a message that's conveyed visually in this scene, and there's a message that is being conveyed visually in this scene. But when you put them together, they create a third scene, or a third effect that is not shown, it's essentially felt by the audience member. Right? So once again, you have the scene, this scene, and when you put them together, the combination creates this third image. The third image you don't see, it's sort of implied by the audience member, and they feel maybe like an emotional or an energy. Yes?
Was that the thing where they would take the static image of someone with a blank face, and then they, depending on what other thing they put in the scene, like, there's pictures of like babies or cats, and people would see this blank face like happy, or there'd be pictures of like graveyards or like burned houses, and people would associate the face with being sad, even though it's the same face, it's just completely neutral.
That is exactly it. Thank you. That is exactly it. So it's this idea that you can create different affects, different emotions by pairing different scenes together. And the Kolshov effect is this idea where you could take the same image, right, the facial expression of an actor, and you pair it with completely different you can cut to a completely different scene and convey different emotions. So you can take the same facial expression of an actor, and then the next scene could be a dead child, right, and that would convey sadness. But if you took that scene and put a bowl of soup, the third effect would be hunger, right? Or if you put you took an attractive woman, it would convey passion or lust, right? So the original Kolshov effect, the original video, it has been lost, but there was a recreation of this, and I do want to show it to you, and then we can talk about whether you buy this argument or not. Do you buy that it actually conveys different affects, different emotions when two scenes are compared to each other, even if it's the same facial expression? Alright, so what do you think? Do you buy that? Do you buy that a third image, a third, like affect is being, a different affect is being generated by the different pairings? Right, so in the first one, we show the bowl of soup. The third, the affect would be hunger, right? The second one was the dead child, right? That would convey sadness. And the third one was an attractive woman, that would convey perhaps lust, right? Did everyone kind of buy that a little bit? The soup one, maybe not as much. Probably because we like soup. No one likes soup. Does anyone like soup? Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, wow, I got a lot of pushback on that. I was not expecting that much pushback. Excellent. Yes.
So, I just think, I don't know if the goal is to have the third effect be a different emotion. I feel like there's a different vibe from each picture. Like with the soup, I really felt nothing, but when he was staring at the child, it was a pedophile.
Yeah.
And when he was staring at the woman, he was just a little creepy.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
I think the third effect
Well, he
changed
just
as
looks
much as
really
the second.
he looks really apathetic. So I just feel like I don't know, maybe
Right. That I think that's the point, right? It's so it's neutral. That way, you're actually putting your own interpretation into it.
I guess.
Weird, because he has like a little smirk on his face.
Yeah.
Like shy.
He does have a little bit of smirk on his face, doesn't he? Yes. Do we have a hand over here or just stretching?
I feel like if I had seen this without knowing like what the effect was for the whole purpose image, I would have seen like hunger and sickness and sadness and sick. But because I knew he superimposes those ideas on his face, I could see the sadness or I could see the love.
Yeah.
But I feel like without knowing that, I wouldn't have.
Yeah, perhaps not. And you know, this is sort of like a basic example of that, but I think we can come up with plenty of examples of contemporary films where we sort of buy into that notion a little more. Good.
I do think it's kind of interesting that it's a film effect that really only works with no sound.
Yeah, perhaps.
Because if there was sound, then there'd be some music.
Right, yeah, sound definitely adds an extra affect to it, most certainly. All right, so we're moving on to a new economic policy, sort of reintroduced private ownership. Film production increased during this time period. You're seeing a lot more films. The Lyndon proportion states that, so Lyndon was really big into using film for propaganda. So this idea of for every independent film, you needed a film that sort of conveyed the message, conveyed the message of socialism. So push the idea of socialism. So let me make sure that I completely get that down for you. We're not restricted to this just yet. Say that film programs need to balance entertainment and education. So all film is a powerful propaganda tool. Oh, that's right. All right. So this idea that yes, it's okay to have sort of these independent entertaining films, but you also need to have educational films, quote unquote, films that are sort of pushing the message, sort of you know, socialism and communism, right? This fight against capitalism, essentially. Yes.
So what's required for all films to push the message of like have propaganda?
Yeah. So he just wanted an equal balance. Right, so yes, you can have these entertaining films, these independent films, but you also need to have these films that are sort of pushing the message, right?
So this is more like a theory and not like what?
No, this is actual policy.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the back.
So this is the same policy as the gap, right? The gap one?
Say that again?
The one to like restrict messages?
Which one are we talking
No,
about?
I forgot. Is this the same one that basically like if you had something in your film like homosexuality or something like that, or like I don't know, nudity, it would take it out?
Oh, the Hays Code.
Oh, there we go, yeah.
Yeah, that would be very different because that's the United States' own self-regulating code, right? This would be different because it's actually government regulation in the Soviet Union. The Hays Code is the United States self-regulation. Yeah, but yeah, it's good that you made that connection there. Yes.
Did we already go over the Hays Code?
Say that again.
Did we already go over the?
We did not go to the Hays Code. Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. All right, so let's move on to increased state control and montage movement. Let me just make sure that I didn't miss a. The Treaty of Rapallo in 1922, this established a treaty with Germany, which opened up trade between Germany and many other countries. Refused to trade with the communist country of Russia. So that's important to bring up. So let's talk about the increased state control and the Montage movement, 1925 to 1930. But first, constructivism. Constructivism is heavily influenced by French Cubanism and Italian Futurism. It's kind of a flamboyant attack on a traditional art form. It was this art form expression that fulfilled a social function. Our artists were often compared to engineers using tools and sort of a scientific approach to making film. This is kind of when we get to the point where artists are these performers are compared to a machine, and the actual film itself is compared to a machine. Like you're constructing this film. One influential director, Meyerhold, used biomechanical acting. It's where the actor's body was assumed to be like a machine and carefully controlled physical movements rather than expression, inner emotion. So very different from a German expressionism, right? So this is your body is like a machine. Let me show you an example of that. This is an example of biomechanical acting. But first, Tony Romo, he wants to tell you about Corona. So you got these jerky movements, right? So you're comparing the body to a machine. That's a recurrent theme in a lot of these films that you see, and a lot of like the film theorists that are starting to come out, including Sergei Eisenstein. We'll talk about him in a second. But thinking of a film as a machine that you're constructing. Right? Let's move on to what we got left. Let's see here. So increased state control, biomechanical acting like we went over already. All right, so let's talk about montage editing. So Sergei Eisenstein may very well be the most influential director of all time. Is that too much? Am I going too hard on that one? Right. So if you are considered into going into film theory, Sergei Eisenstein, he comes up a significant amount. Right. So he's one of the very first film theorists. So not only did he make films, but he wrote about filmmaking. He wrote about, what messages films convey, right? He would often critique films, right, and talk about what makes a good film. A little bit about Sergei Eisenstein. He was part of the revolution. His job was constructing bridges. A lot of his writings, he compares creating films to constructing a bridge. So once again, we're getting to that theme of, you're taking individual scenes and you're putting them together, and the way that you put them together conveys a message. Right? Very talented director, right? Probably even more talented than D.W. Griffith, I would say. Right? A little more artistically talented. And I want to show two of his films. The first one is Battleship Potemkin. This film is heavily influential. There's many contemporary films that are influenced by this and make homages to this film, but I do want to show an extended clip from this film, Battleship Potemkin, and then we can talk about it. Right? But what I want you to think about, what I want you to, we put our film analysis caps on, I want you to think about what are some of the new innovations, what are some of the new techniques that you're noticing from this clip. But this is from Battleship Potemkin. Let me see if I got it. I have it right here. Just want to pause here and just say how beautiful this scene is right here. All right, moving on. Oh, he's not there. We'll have to go show him. All right, good. All right. Oh, wow. So, just finished. So let's talk about that. I mean, your emotions, the feelings that you're feeling are like they're deliberate, right? The director is wanting you to feel these things, right? So, let's just start off with anybody who wants. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, this may be because I'm a fashion major, but I noticed the costuming in it, like the way that like the women were dressed and stuff, kind of like it kind of like reminded me of like death and like being alive, kind of.
Okay, interesting.
So
Excellent.
that kind of like brought about like my emotion too.
I like it. Yes. What else? Yes.
I think the angles were really interesting because as a contrast from like last week, with the way things were shot, it kind of looked like a stage production. With this, you saw a lot of close-ups, you saw a lot of angled shots like from below looking up,
Right.
or like the shot of the statue with all the people in front of it, or the shadows. I think these are angles.
Yeah, great. Next.
I think the way he decided to convey all of this pain through it like just being constant, it's like I guess nowadays maybe someone would have stopped right at like where the first baby was shot and like the mom is killed, but like he was like, no, this is ongoing, and then it goes to the next mom,
Yeah.
the next baby, and I'd really appreciate if you press play because I'm not sorry.
The clip, the link is on in my notes too if you want to watch the whole thing. Right. So yeah, let's talk about the use of the baby and the mother and the children. Right. And the people who are they'll have legs. Right. This idea of these defenseless people who are having just a peaceful gathering that are being interrupted by this violence, right? This is propaganda, obviously, but it's conveying this message through editing. Yes.
Like there were 2 points in all of that. So it was like with all the different angles, like how they were just cut and like just super fast between all the angles.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're watching it, you're like, what the heck's going on? As if you are actually like one of those people inside the film, and you're like, yo, what's happening? And it makes you like kind of feel anxious because you're like, I have no idea what's happening,
Yeah.
which is very deliberate because it's like if you are having a gathering and there is a bunch of military people coming in and shooting, you'd also be very like scared for your life.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you're right. The pacing of the editing creates this crazy, this chaotic feeling in the audience.
And especially with the angles, like it was like when they were like on the side of like the soldiers, they made it look downwards as if it was like a higher authority.
Yeah.
Whereas when it was like in the perspective of like the mother, it was like it was like looking like upwards.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like you're powerless and you're looking up to like, you're really looking for some solution and you're trying to do everything.
Yeah, fantastic. It's showing that hierarchy of, you have the soldiers that are shooting down on the people. The people are trying to escape and they're going down and the shooters are shooting down, right? It's this added layer that the film has created.
What are the shots called? Because I know there's like a name for
Like a
it.
musket shot, is that what you?
No, the like angles.
Oh, I don't
Like
know.
you looking down on someone, looking up on someone.
Yeah, I don't know. What about on this side? Anybody want to say anything on this side? Yes.
I was watching a review of what was it called? Uh, this chick was marrying this dude, and they were playing this game, and they were trying to kill her. That one, and they like the mom and the two kids at the end of the movie. Spoilers, maybe. They run out of the room and then blow up off screen.
Okay.
So we don't show that kind of stuff anymore where kids die off the screen for your eyes. Is there like a rule against that now, or is it just like how culture shifted?
Yeah, I guess that would just be the choice of the director. Yeah, I guess that's just, more culturally accepted. Why we don't show that in, an American film. Yeah. Yes.
I was gonna say I really appreciated the cameos in the films, especially with the gentleman working downstairs.
One very important characteristic of montage filmmaking, and this is important to state, is that most films in montage filmmaking, films in the Soviet Union, use archetypal characters, so they're not so much concerned with focusing on one character and getting to know the psychology of that character and giving that character a name and a story arc. Montage filmmaking is more interested in these archetypal characters, right? You have the laborers, you have the soldiers, you have the monarchs, the aristocrats, you have, like the lower class, the handicapped, the children, right? You have these archetypal characters. So it's rare that you'll see a Soviet film that sort of dives into individual characters and understands their psychology. So that's a very important characteristic of Soviet montage. One more before we go. Yes.
I just have a
Move on.
question. So this is propaganda.
Yeah.
What's it propaganda for? Because it seems like the government and the soldiers are the evil ones in the situation.
Right. So this would be the Tsar government. So this would be before. This represents the monarchy.
Okay.
Right. So it's sort of showing the evils of the monarchy.
And it's like we're not bad anymore, so we're now good.
Right. So yeah, sort of justifying, why there was a revolution. Yeah, certainly. All right. Let's move on to something else here. I did want to show this one. I'm always amused by this. Here's a couple of films that are making an homage to this scene.
Spoiler alert, he's baby died.
So you got this innocent bystander that's caught up in all this chaos. Here's something else.
Is this supposed to be a satire?
Yes, yeah. yeah, so that was Naked Gun, correct? Yeah. Some of those images were a little culturally insensitive. Here's our next film. So this is a film called Strike, also by Sergei Eisenstein, in the same year. This film depicts a factory worker who gets framed for a missing piece that gets lost or gets stolen. And this is Strike.
No. Oh my gosh, so you didn't even do application.
So once again, it's conveying the harshness of factory work, right, and the plight of the laborer, right? And as you can see here, we're also seeing these archetypical characters, right? You're seeing the laborer versus the manager, right? Names aren't necessary because it's conveying this class structure. Yes?
Was it me, or did it seem like the higher ups, like the bosses and stuff, were doing like a machine kind of thing? Like they were really stiff.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Excellent. So this is the catalyst of the strike. Right. All right. So moving on here. So the strike. Sergei Eisenstein, right? That's a very important person you need to know. A couple of things in Soviet montage, some editing styles that this time period sort of instilled that we still use today. Overlapping editing and elliptical editing. Can anyone tell me what overlapping editing is? Yes. Keep going. So that's like superimposing on the film strip, but you're essentially saying the right thing, right? So overlapping editing is this idea where you're extending the scene by sort of repeating. So you're showing different shots that are elongating the actual scene. Does that make sense to anybody what I just said?
Different shots of the same action?
Yeah, you're showing different shots of the same action, and if you want to talk about like the time frame of when how that action happened, you're extending that action. I'll show you some examples. This is overlapping editing. This is from also Battleship Potemkin. Let's see here. The particular moment I'm talking about is when he throws the plate down. Anyone notice that?
Yeah.
Let me show you a contemporary example. Alright, so that wasn't 20 different buildings blowing up, it was one building that shown over and over again. That's overlapping editing from Commando. Arnold Schwarzenegger. The next is elliptical editing. Does anyone tell me what elliptical editing is? Any guesses? It's essentially the opposite, right? So rather than extending the scene, you are cutting the scene down, or you're cutting parts of the scene out, right? Here's an example of elliptical editing from Batman Begins. Alright, so rather than showing him going up the entire mountain, right, we're cutting is the bottom, middle, right? So that's elliptical editing. Up next, like I said before, typage or archetypical characters was the characteristic of montage filmmaking. Non-diegetical inserts. So does anyone know what diegetic versus non-diegetic means? So diegetic is everything within the film, right? So the reality within the film. Non-diegetic, so diegetic would be everything that the characters in the film see or hear. Non-diegetic is what's outside the film world, what we as an audience member hear, and the audience doesn't hear it. So non-diegetic examples would be soundtrack, perhaps, although film scholars have argued that that's not the case. Non-diegetic would be the narrator, right? Because we assume that the characters don't hear the narrator, right? That's for us. So a non-diegetic insert would be something that is not in the actual reality, the world of the film, something that's just designed for us as an audience. Right? Let me see if I can show the example of a non-diegetic. This is from October of 1928. Let me see if I can. So you got these archetypal characters, this typage character, these rich aristocrats. There it is. All right, so that was the non-diegetic insect. Did anyone capture that? So you got, right, the chicken, I think it's a peacock. Right, so it's not designed, it's not actually happening in the world of the film. It's designed for us to convey a message, right?
So, do you know what the peacock is trying to convey?
Like this very showy, like self-interested, right? Yeah, so this like the metaphor of the peacock, right? This golden peacock. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay, got it? All right. Make sure that I'm not missing anything. We talked about October 1928, showed that film. Let's talk about the decline of the montage movement. Let me read my notes so I don't miss anything here. All right, so once again, we're talking about the three eras of the wartime hardship. We talked about the new economic policy, and then now we're having more government control. During this time period, it's the first 5-year plan. This first 5-year plan was a way for the government to sort of regulate everything, but so regulating the economy, but regulating the film industry as well. The goal was to increase the number of films made and to build an equipment factories to supply all the industry needs. So there was Sergei Eisenstein's films, including his montage films, were criticized by the government because they felt like it was too hard to interpret by the average viewer, right? So they wanted to come up with stories that were easy to spread propaganda. So they controlled the film industry during this time period. Cinema was centralized. Filmmakers adopted more accessible styles. And during the 1930s, Soviet film industry required all films to follow an approach called the socialist realism. Socialist realism we'll talk about in a much later chapter. But the thing that you needed to know is that you got these three different eras in Soviet in the 1920s. And this third one is the government is sort of controlling the film industry again. And as a reward, we'll just watch this.
Single-handed, we have to make you a complete soldier in very little time. How are we going to do that? I think I know just what we need.
it. That's all we have for today. So Soviet montage, or Soviet cinema in the 1920s, that's the last chapter that's going to be on your first exam. So when we meet on Thursday, we're it's the introduction of sound, and that's starting for the next chapter, or next exam. Right, so this is the last one on exam 1. Questions, concerns? We're all good?